So we think we're going to talk about emptiness. This is the very heart of Buddha's teachings on wisdom, the basis of all his other teachings. Everything leads us to this one, because this is ultimately how things are, and what we finally have to perceive, to cognize, in order to stop suffering, in order to achieve liberation. So we're going to listen to this so that we can take it away, go a bit step deeper, get a bit of a better sense of what it means, and apply it in our daily lives to loosen the grip of the ego grasping and the fears and the drama and the suffering and the pain, to take us one step closer to our own marvellous potential. So finally we can, on the basis of this, we can be of benefit to others. Because as long as we grasp at this inherent me, we're useless to others. Not just useless, not helping them, but we also make a mess and we harm them. So we're sick of this. And so we reiterate our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings for this reason. Sangye Chadam Soke Chognam La Jangcho Balu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chanyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chadam Soke Chognam La Jangcho Balu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chanyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chadam Soke Chognam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Sho. So this emptiness is so interesting, because as soon as we hear the word, everyone gets very confused, and there's so much misconception, of course, among Buddhists and non-Buddhists about what it really means. And it's easy enough to misunderstand. Easy enough to misunderstand, because the words seem so misleading to us. So part of the problem is because we don't dig a little bit deeper and get into just sort of the method, the way, the tradition, the culture, the way of talking. I think this is so crucial, certainly for us in our materialist, modern, technological, scientific world, contemporary world, and certainly in the English language, at least the only one I know, we just don't talk like this. The concepts, the structure. So for me it's like a technical thing more than anything, getting clear about the way the words are used. You know, much of the time you're going to hear Buddhists say, oh, I've been hearing teachings for 30 years and I just don't understand emptiness. Because what's happening is, unfortunately, out of our intellectual laziness and out of our tendency to mystify things that are called spiritual practice, especially something like emptiness, then we actually, we're not realizing that we are capable of understanding it first intellectually. We get so confused certainly among the Tibetan Buddhists or all the Buddhists, we talk about realizations. A realization of something. And then we tend to then think that's the point, which of course it is. And then we discount and throw out the concepts, the thoughts, because we think they're inferior. But we don't do that in our ordinary world. That's why I keep using ordinary examples. Anything we've learned in our world, cooking, basketball, mathematics, music, we know we first go to somebody who knows how to do it. And then that person doesn't just demonstrate physically and hope we intuit the meaning. Even if they do demonstrate physically, like basketball, they're going to talk words to us. They're going to explain the theories to us. When it comes to cooking, you just don't watch a person. If you're really bright, you might get that. But you need your recipe book. You need the words. You need the recipe. When it comes to music, you've got to get Mr. Bach's confusing strange little lines with dots on them and learn musical theory. We know this. We don't confuse it. We don't go, well, I've got to play it intuitively. What's the point of learning boring old theories? We're not superstitious like that. We somehow can see the relationship between theory and practice. But as soon as it comes to spiritual, we lose the plot. We get so confused. And there's no reason to. And the fact is, in our culture, we're super intelligent. We're super intellectually trained. We're super brilliant intellectually. So we are easily capable of understanding emptiness. Intellectually. And that's your first step. Because you know perfectly well, if you don't get the recipe words right, you'll never in a million years make the right cake. If you don't get the simple words right about playing music, you'll never be able to play the music. So don't think one doesn't need the other. But we tend to think so in spiritual. There's something very deep inside us that we mystify and then chuck the baby out with the bathwater and get all cosmic. And then we go, oh, I've been hearing it for 30 years. And really believing it's self-existently difficult. And, oh, I can't understand emptiness. And because you've never got the words right first. This is something, and it might take time. But this I can't, this is just so obvious. And this is the way, of course, in the big monastic university system in Tibet, this is the approach, you know. And most of us will go, oh, that's intellectual. I'm not a philosopher. I can't do that. It's not true. We can. It's just not true. I mean, even to learn to use a computer, you've got to learn so many theories. You've got to be a genius these days, you know. It's just not true to say you can't. It just isn't true. It's just some obstacle in the mind, you know. Sure, it's not easy, but like anything, to do it well, nothing is ever easy. So the commonest mistake we make when we hear the word emptiness, and that's just shorthand, you know. It's shorthand for a very intensive, interesting theoretical position, a philosophical position about things. It's just the shortest of shorthand. It's like saying relativity. Oh, I don't understand relativity. I've been hearing about it for 30 years, you know. Well, because you've never studied it, that's why. You haven't studied it properly. Of course you don't understand it. You can't just say the word relativity. You don't just sit there and go, relativity, hoping something cosmic will happen. That's how superstitious we are when it comes to spiritual. I mean, it's just shocking. Shocking how we are intellectually lazy and how we mystify it. So, let's unpack the word to see what it actually means. You know, it takes a while for the penny to drop, even intellectually, but that's okay. We have to persevere. And if we are attempting to be Buddhist and use the Buddhist tools, we have to persevere, no choice, because everything leads to this. To see, have the direct experiential insight into emptiness, quote unquote, is what cuts the cause of suffering. And we're now on the way, inexorably, irreversibly, on the way to liberation. Until then, we keep falling down, falling back, losing the plot. From there, we can only move forward. So it's a crucial point. This shift occurs at that moment of the first direct, non-conceptual experience of emptiness. These are the words. You know. So let's see what it means and why we need to understand it. Well, really simply, Buddha's saying, right now our minds are riddled with nonsense, riddled with misconceptions, which have a particular characteristic of being neurotic emotionally. That we identify with. Neurotic emotions, that we get. Misconceptions seem a bit abstract to us. Or put it another way, the neurotic emotions that we think are so normal and at the core of our being, which Buddha outrageously says are not at the core of our being, but which he totally acknowledges we have, which are the source of our suffering, they have a particular characteristic of being misconceptions. So to get that, we have to begin, first of all, to unpack what a neurotic emotion is, and get to see how beyond the feeling aspect of it, the neurotic emotional aspect of it, when we start to look into it more deeply in our own mind, we're going to unpack it and get, when it becomes in the mind more quiet, we're going to start to hear that beneath that emotional energy, there is a very elaborate conceptual story that informs the emotion, that causes the emotion. And that is what takes time to see. That is what takes time to see. Hearing it initially, we can't see it like this. But when we start to look inside, looking upon a Buddhist model of the mind and how these neuroses work, we're going to then begin to hear this elaborate conceptual story. So it sounds like a joke initially. What is an example of a neurotic emotion? Let's call it anger. One of them is called anger. So to hear is a neurotic emotion. That's fairly evident. We look at somebody shouting and yelling, uh-oh, she's angry, we'll see. Tears coming out, eyes wide, words vomiting out the mouth, completely irrational, having a mental breakdown, you know, basically. We get that. There's an emotion, a very strong emotion. But to hear that the words that person is shouting, which we know, because are coming from thoughts, because words are expressions of thoughts, And indeed, they're emotional thoughts. They've got lots of drama behind them. But if you wrote them down nicely, clearly, accurately, edited them perfectly with correct punctuation, lots of spaces and lots of exclamation marks and dots and irrational, disconnected sentences, but you wrote all the words down, what have you got on a piece of paper? So evident as a joke, You don't hear the shouting and the yelling. What you've got is a series of words. And anybody with half a brain reading those words will go, oh, wow, this person's angry. So how do you know they're angry? You can't hear them. Because you understand that anger is a series of thoughts. It's not rocket science. What is on that piece of paper? Thoughts. What are words? Thoughts. How dare you do that to me? When a person says that, we know they're feeling angry, hurt, offended, upset. How dare you do that? I did not do that. She is so evil. She is the cause of all my suffering. She whatever. We can hear the words immediately. So get beyond the emotion and listen to the words, because that is the key to understanding what anger is about. Hear the story. Analyze it. Right there. So we start to unpack it. And this is where it's most fascinating. When I go to, we go to our therapists in our culture, because our views of the mind and of sentient beings and of suffering and happiness in our culture assume that I come from my parents, that they made me, assume that I'm physical only, assume that the past events in my brain and my chemicals and my DNA are the causes of who I am. So as soon as we read those words, the first place we go to understand why the angry person's saying those words is we go into the past events to see what happened, to trigger those upset thoughts. Buddha says you don't need to do that. That's not the issue, which is surprising to us. Even to hear this is a surprise. This is being your own therapist. You learn to analyze the very words themselves. And this is where we have to know Buddhist psychology, because we have to, if we analyze those concepts on that piece of paper, all of this, by the way, is leading us to emptiness. This is totally leading us to emptiness. We're going to see a series of assumptions in those thoughts, aren't we? Well, let's look at the first one, where it says, and where's the one we feel, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. Would be maybe one sentence we might say when we're angry. Well, let's unpack the assumptions there. There's a huge assumption there. First of all, why did you do it to me? I don't deserve it. Well, let's look at the I don't deserve it. The Buddha says that's a mistaken conception. That's a mistaken conception. This is how you be your own therapist as a Buddhist. That's a mistaken conception. Because why? Well, as we all know, Buddha asserts karma. Buddha asserts that all consciousness of this person who's angry, Fred, let's say, if we track Fred's consciousness back and back and back and back, we're going to go back to sort of, 3.5 lives ago, if we had perfect memory and clairvoyance, and we're going to see that the person, Mary, who just punched him in the nose, Mary was harmed by Fred 3.5 lives ago. I'm speaking very simplistically here. First of all, there's no way Mary is going to punch Fred in the nose if there's not some karmic history between them. So we track that back, and we had really perfect memory, really brilliant minds and clairvoyance. We're going to get back to the source of that 3.5. Yes, indeed, we could say it's a past event, but not in this life, and not in Mummy and Daddy's DNA. No, in that person's very own consciousness 3.5 lives ago. We're going to get back to an event between, Fred and Mary when they were other sentient beings. This is quite literally how the karmic one would be. And we're going to find an activity that occurred there between Mary and Fred when they were called something else. And now it's reversed, Mary sees Fred in this life, can't stand the sight of him, no idea why she doesn't like him. Before she knows it, she's fighting with him and punches him in the nose. So now because Fred doesn't remember a past life, because Fred has the view that Mummy made him, because Fred believes he's an innocent victim, because Fred believes he didn't ask to get born, because Fred doesn't have the view of karma, all of which Buddha would say are true, then this is a misconception, he says, very simply. And because of holding this misconception very strongly, that I didn't ask to get born, that Mummy and Daddy made me, that I'm an innocent victim, that I don't have no clue why this person is harming me, all of these are misconceptions, Buddha says, all packed in this simple sentence, I don't deserve it. How dare you do that to me? This is how you analyse what anger is. And all of this is where you can see how it's a misconception, taking Buddha's view as our hypothesis here. This is how we practice day to day. This is Buddha's practice. This is how it sounds. This is what you do being your own therapist. You don't need to worry about why Mary did it to you. You don't need to worry about how come Daddy punched you 14 years ago when you're a little girl and you've got the habit of being angry now because Daddy punched you. Nothing, that's not relevant. It's not helpful. It could be a bit helpful, but not really. It's not the point. It's not the main central issue. So I'm getting at here this idea of it's being a misconception. Whereas, of course, we don't in our world think it's a misconception. We think it's a normal response. How dare you harm me? Who do you think you are? I don't deserve it. How dare you do that to me? We don't think that's a misconception. We think it's a righteous thought. We think it's a valid thought. Why? Because it expresses our philosophy, the samsaric philosophy, that Mummy and Daddy made me, that I'm physical, I'm a product of genes and DNA, I'm an innocent victim. That we have to hear it like this. This is how you unpack these things. And if we can't unpack these concepts now, forget about trying to unpack the concepts of emptiness. This is why this comes first. This is a vividly held, instinctively held, primordially held misconception, Buddha says. It's called anger. It's a series of thoughts that, because of the habit of this misconception, brought with us from countless past lives, in believing I'm an innocent victim, in not understanding karma, not having the memory of karma, not having the view of karma, then this misconception has grown and grown and grown to the point it's virtually instinctive. It's an ancient habit, I brought it with me. So we say, why do you get angry, Robina? Well, Mary punched me. That's a logical reason in the West. For samsara. It's not for the Buddha. It's part of the cause. It's just the trigger. Mary was merely the trigger. The real answer to why am I angry is, well, guess what? I was angry before. And why? Because I've got this misconception in my mind from believing in it so strongly. And the point is, beneath it is the other misconception, deeper than that, which is called attachment. Even more primordial misconception. Buddha says anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So how does the voice of attachment sound? Well, that's so much more instinctive. Anger is the natural response, the millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants. So the attachment, also a neurotic emotion, far more subtle, far more ingrained, far harder to identify, and also a misconception. And the misconception of attachment is that it's this desperate, frantic craving to get what I want every microsecond. Now that, in turn, beneath even this, now we're getting to the point, that is based upon the root delusion, the root misconception, the mother of them all, the assumption of an I. Because of the grasping, primordial grasping at an inherent, independent I, this is the deepest, most primordial delusion of all. Because of this, there is attachment to get what that I wants, and then mortal wounded anger when it doesn't get it. So anger is, they're all, and then depression, and then jealousy, and then wanting to harm, all of these are built, each one built on the other. So we have to unpack these layers of misconceptions, each coming from a deeper misconception, until we get to the root misconception, which is the most, as I said, primordial. There's not even a name for it in our culture. It's just actually at the level of assumption. We actually assume that there is an independent, real, solid, pointable I in our world, in our view. We've learned it in our theistic teachings. They are the personification of the view of a self-existent I, called the soul. And in the neurotic, in the ordinary samsara, in the Western, the materialist world, there's also said to be an I, a self. So it's assumed as a truth, not even seen as a mistake. And all the delusions, attachment, then anger, then jealousy, then pride, all upholds that I. And that I, too, the belief in it, is a misconception. So the insight into emptiness is what puts atomic bomb on that misconception and annihilates it from our mind, which is the beginning of the end of suffering. So, are we communicating so far? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. The trouble here is because these misconceptions are so instinctive, we came fully programmed with them from the first second of conception, Buddha says, and he would suggest from eons of habit of believing in them as true, then they're now just totally instinctive. That's what we mean by instinct in our culture. And of course, because it's instinct, we reify it. Because it seems instinctive, when we observe it in sentient beings, we assume it's an absolute truth. In other words, we don't question these assumptions. So Buddha's been quite radical here in getting us to unpack what we would consider totally normal states of mind. But he calls them deep mental illnesses. So he is quite radical, the depths to which he will demand that we must unpack these assumptions in our mind. Don't take them for granted, which of course is how we do it in our own world. And then we uphold these as true. The other aspect of these misconceptions that makes it incredibly hard for us to stop believing in them, because if they are misconceptions, we have to see that we believe in them. You know, we believe in them. But what makes them hard to stop believing in them, first we have to even see that we have these misconceptions. First we have to recognize we have the emotions, which we do, but stop believing in the wrong interest. Stop believing that you're the cause of it. That's the first step. As long as Oprah says, most of us in this world don't even realize that what happens in our mind plays a role in our life. Forget about playing a central role. We just think it's everything out there that is the main cause. And this is truly samsaric. This is the real samsaric philosophy. So what makes it so hard already is our addiction to believing that Mary is the cause of the problem. Or when John is kind to me, that he is the cause of my happiness, because we blame someone for making us happy just as we blame them for making us suffer. The same logic in our mind. We assume the causes are out there. So already that's hard. To start, it's like reversing the energy of a bomb is how I think of it, to start actually listening to your own thoughts and realizing that the thoughts themselves are the problem. Mary's merely the catalyst. John and his kindness are merely the catalyst for my happiness. This is a shocking idea. This is bad enough. But the other thing that makes it so difficult to stop believing in these misconceptions, even if we can start to look into them and actually have confidence that what's going on in my mind is the problem. What then makes it so hard, as they say in Buddhist psychology, how the thing appears to us, Mary, John, the event, the cake, the way it appears to us, this is how they talk, is in the aspect of what's in our mind. Mm-hmm. We get that. Our mummies told us that, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's a perfect statement of this. Or when you've got your rose-coloured spectacles on, then things look all hunky-dory. We have these ways of understanding that have come down as like just sayings, we don't unpack them. But things out there appear to us in the aspect of what's in our mind. Meaning, whatever's in your mind causes the thing to look like that. Big surprise. We don't think that. We don't think our mind plays a role. We just think I'm an innocent victim. And then, Mary comes along and is mean to me. We don't think that we have anything to do with making the cake look delicious. That sounds hilarious. We think the cake is delicious in and of itself, and I'm just this innocent victim, and the cake is just sitting there begging me to eat it. Like, what can I do? Is this not how we feel in life? This is what Buddha means by being stuck in samsara. So bad enough, as long as Opa says, that things appear to us in a way they don't exist, meaning they appear to us according to what's in my mind. Bad enough that they appear to us as this or that, which isn't true, but the worst thing is we believe it's true. And this is what we have to try and do. So the first step is to, even though we don't even know, we're not sure how it exists, but just to hear the words, as Pavolka Rinpoche says, maybe just to think the way the delicious cake is looking so divine out there and frantic and feeling like it's causing me to eat it, like I'm a victim of it. Even that happens, but just to think, to stop and think, maybe, Robina, the cake doesn't exist in the way it appears to me. This is stupendous. All of this is why it takes so much time to practice. And this, discussing in this way, is the way of being your own therapist. This is how you apply Buddhist psychology in your daily life. It's very tasty. But what goes on in here is running the show. Not that out there. Such a shock to us. Such a shock to us. Because the energy of attachment and anger, the two that we run between 1,000 times a day, attachment and aversion, is 100% addicted to out there. Unbelievable, like a junkie grasping frantically at the delicious things and eating like a vampire. Stuffing them into the five senses, hungrily, greedily, desperately, instinctively. And then having total mental breakdown the millisecond aversion arises in the mind when attachment is thwarted. This is samsara, people. Look at the world. It's totally heartbreaking. And both of these, as I'm saying, these misconceptions, which are virtually instinctive emotions for us, which we totally consider normal, so normal that you'd be considered abnormal if you didn't have them, based on the root lie, the mother of them all, the root delusion, so primordial, this assumption of an I. So, of course, an assumption of an I in a way that the I doesn't exist. And this is where we have to get the words very clear, because we can get very confused about this. So this is where we can talk about the two truths, as Buddha talks about. Things exist as conventions. We can see the world is made of trillions of different, distinct conventions. Cups and toilets and apples and women and men and legs and noses and anger and love and minds and stars and moons. All these words that refer to different, distinct phenomena that we can say are the contents of our world. So conventionally speaking, we can very comfortably say, I'm Robina, there's a chair. You know, we can easily say that. That's convenient, comfortable, reasonable language, which we all use to communicate. Nothing wrong with that. So there is a Robina sitting on a chair in Kurukulla Centre in Medford. That's a statement of fact, conventionally. I'm not Mary, this isn't a table, and this is not New York. Just words we use, labels we use to refer to certain things that we all agree in our English language are true, conventionally. Comfortable, no problem. If you don't go into it more, there's no discussion, there's nothing to worry about. That you'd pass your exam. You got 100% right. Robina is sitting in a chair in Kurukulla Centre in Medford. Simple. But the Buddha says, that's true conventionally, and if we don't go further, there's no argument, there's no discussion. But, he says, we need to go further, because we're not happy with that bare statement. We actually, he says, with all these neuroses in our mind, these delusions, primordially the ego grasping, and then the attachment, then the aversion, and the jealousy, and all the others, and other misconceptions, grasping at things as permanent, and etc., having no view of karma, and all this other stuff that the Buddha would say is the way the world is. But all these other concepts in our mind riddled with all these other misconceptions, we dump all of these onto the cups and toilets and chairs and Robinas and events in our life, and they cause the things to appear all wrongly to us. So it's sort of like, we're colourblind and we forget names. You're colourblind. There is a Robina, but you think she's wearing blue. And there is a chair, but you think it's pink. So there is a chair, but you get it, there's some aspect you get wrong. There is Robina, but you've got something wrong. So what Lama Zopa says, what he says these delusions do, they decorate on top of what does exist, speaking conventionally, chairs and Robinas, characteristics that don't exist there, pink and blue. So it's not as if you chuck the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, there's no Robina not sitting on any chair in no Medford. No, that's too extreme. There is a Robina sitting in a chair in Medford. That's a fact. So we've got to look more in a nuanced way, a more precise way to analyse what mistake our mind is making. Where are the misconceptions in that cognition of Robina sitting in a chair in Kurukulla in Medford? And that's the tricky part. We've got to be much more sensitive in the way we analyse. So convention, the simple way to put it is, there is a Robina sitting in a chair, conventionally speaking. But then we go to ultimate, and the words would be, but not from its own side, not in and of itself, not intrinsically. So there is no inherent Robina, there is no inherent chair, there is no inherent Kurukulla centre, and there is no inherent Medford. That is a correct statement. But as soon as we hear this, that's when we lose the plot. Not because it's esoteric. Well, it is until you learn it. French is esoteric until I learn it. But we then don't bother to learn it. We just go, oh, I don't understand, it's all confusing. Well, squeeze your brain, as Lamayishi says, and you can understand it. So we have to put these two seeming misconceptions together. That there is Robina sitting in a chair in Kurukulla Centre in Medford, but there's no inherent Robina sitting in any inherent chair, in any inherent Kurukulla Centre sitting in any inherent Medford. And we'll go, well, who says there is an inherent Medford? What are you on about? And Buddha will say that we don't realise it, but we assume there is an inherent Robina inherently sitting in an inherent chair, in inherent Kurukulla, in inherent Medford. We don't realise we're seeing it wrongly. We don't realise that. Why? Because we've been doing it for eons. So we're not actually seeing reality. Superficially, we've got it right. This person is called Robina. Superficially, we've got that right. At least you don't call her Fred or Mary. You got something right. But as Lama Zopa again says, delusions in our mind, which are so instinctive, these misconceptions, so ancient history, we don't recognise them. What they're doing naturally, every microsecond, is decorating on top of Robina characteristics that just don't exist there. And this is the tricky part. This is where we have to be precise and clear in learning exactly what it is. Like you've got to get the microscope of our mind. Now again, so curious, we get this level of precision and brilliance and clarity and intelligence and discipline when it comes to what we call science. We are geniuses at it. Geniuses. But we don't think, we don't realise we should apply the same discipline, the same clarity, the same precision, and accessing, here though, the microscope of our own mind in order to investigate the truth of all this. This is what we have to do. This is what being a Buddhist is. So how is the neurotic emotion that actually is a misconception, how is attachment a misconception? We know the neurotic emotion part. Well, let's forget about the karmic one. The anger we described, how that's a misconception. But let's look at the way the object appears to you when you're angry. How that is a misconception. Merely that, how that is a misconception. It's not too difficult to see this. So we all know, but we so take it for granted, we don't question it. We know when you're hungry and the stomach is empty, all the conditions are there ready, and you've got this neediness for chocolate cake, and then you thought about it, what I want, and then I want chocolate, and then you've visualised the cake and you fantasise getting it, because that's one of the characteristics of attachment. You think about the thing when it's not there, and then you manipulate to get it. And then when your eyes land on that brown triangle, we know it looks far more delicious than, say, to someone else who doesn't care about chocolate cake, even if they're not attached to chocolate, even if they don't have aversion for chocolate cake. Let's say they're indifferent to chocolate cake. Let's say they're not attached to food. Shock, horror. I've hardly met anybody who's not attached to food. They just go, oh, it's okay. No, nothing special. So we know there are people like this, and then we know there's a third person who would be revolted at the thought of chocolate cake, so they vomit every time they eat it. So for that person it would look disgusting, and they would believe it is disgusting. For the person who sees it as indifferent, they just think it's indifferent, and they believe it's indifferent. And for me, seeing it as divine, I would believe it's divine. We know this. This is not rocket science, but we take it for granted. We don't pick it up and go, wow, that's fascinating. Let's look into this. We just go, oh, that's normal. But this is what Buddha's saying. This is proving, actually, that there's no inherent cake from its own side. This is enough to help us realise the emptiness of cake. It should blow our minds, actually. But it doesn't. We just think, oh, yeah. And then we know, once you start stuffing it in, and you've eaten 5 pieces, you then know it will now look disgusting to you. We know that too. We know that. We know that every day. We know that 1,000 times this happens. We know it, and we don't. But all Buddha's saying is we are so addicted to this process, we don't get the learning from it. And the learning is very obvious. That what's in your mind, that the thing out there is appearing to you in the aspect of what's in your mind. So meaning your mind is calling it that. It's not that at all. Right there, we can prove it. It's so simple. It's not rocket science. The cake isn't what you think it is, because if it were really delicious, hear the words, in itself, everybody would see it. It's very clear. It's very logical. But we never think it. We don't get it. We don't join the dots. So the very fact that 3 people can look at it and see something different proves that hear the words, that there is no cake from its own side as this or that. This is the meaning of emptiness. So the way emptiness, meaning what Buddha wants us to see in the cake. What Buddha wants us to see in the cake that does exist conventionally, what he wants us to see in the cake that does exist conventionally is the absence of inherent cake. Because the absence of inherent cake exists nowhere other than in the conventional cake. Therefore, emptiness can't mean nothing. There has to be a cake in the first place for there to be the emptiness of the inherent existence of the cake. Right there. So, absence. So it's just like if you see this as blue, here I have a maroon Zen. Let's call it Zen, okay? And your eyes, you've got colour blindness, and your eyes come over here and you look at my Zen, which we will all agree, if our eyes are working nice and the light is reasonable, everything's working well, we'll all roughly agree this is called, it's a version of maroon, okay? My shemmed up is slightly different maroon, my donka is probably the same maroon, and this is a bit different maroon. But we would agree the English sound maroon applies to this colour here. So just like, if Tara is colourblind, and because of some fault in her eyeballs or whatever, she looks over here and she doesn't see maroon, she sees blue. We know that's possible. Buddha says we're doing this all the time, seeing things that do exist, but imposing upon them things that don't exist. But we think it's normal, So it's sort of like if I see it as maroon and she sees it as blue, we both think it's normal, and then we're going to have a war about it. Which is what happens when we fight about which football team is the better team, So basically what Buddha says is what he's saying right at the very centre of all this is Buddha's pursuit the whole point behind all this is to see what's true. We're trying to establish what's true. He wants us to see that which exists. In Buddhist philosophy, when you study, there are various synonyms for that which exists. The word phenomenon, the word existent, the word object, the word, I can't think there's more, I always forget, 4, 6 synonyms. Well, the one called the term existent, the noun, then, phenomenon, that which exists, the definition, this is extremely tasty, the definition of an existent is something that can be cognized by mind, a valid state of mind. This is axiomatic for the Buddha. That which exists by definition is that which can be cognized by a valid state of mind. And that which a valid state of mind cognizes is necessarily that which exists. So for the Buddha, mind is absolutely central, not just some external thing that can see reality or not if it wants. Reality is defined by cognition. So tasty. So, Buddha's saying, as we're already indicating, that in our mind we have all these misconceptions, these neuroses, that see things on what does exist that don't exist. As Others puts it, again, their delusions decorate on top of what does exist, characteristics that don't exist. So easy to see when Tara's eyes look at this Zen, we understand the idea that if she can see something that doesn't exist here, she sees blue Zen. Well, first mistake in the West, very commonly, people will say, oh, well, if it appears blue to me, I'm allowed to see it as blue, so it must be blue. Because we really give all this power to what goes on in our minds, and we think merely the fact that a bunch of stuff goes on in our mind is enough to validate it. Well, that's why we're all insane. Like, we think truth is just subjective, We know it's not true when it comes to maths. It's like saying, well, I think 1 and 1 is 7. I'm allowed to think that. Well, Buddha actually agrees, you are allowed, but check it out, what will happen? You'll be in big trouble, because no one will communicate with you. You can think it if you like, you can believe that 1 and 1 is 7, you can put a religion about it, you can write books and everything if you want. But you won't, nobody will communicate with you. You'll get into trouble, people, you won't get what you want, you'll fight with everybody, so it's just not convenient, it's just silly. And when we realise there's no inherent 1 and 1 is 2, then it'll easy to be accepted. Okay, we'll agree 1 and 1 is 2. So anyway, there's Tara. Her eyes are wrong. She looks over here, and she cognizes blue. So it's sort of, so then she'll go, well, how do I know it's not blue? How do I know it's maroon? And that's a very good question. So let's look at this. Now this is our big problem, I think, when it comes to reality, because let's say we're used to having a theistic religion, and I'm not complaining about this. Anybody who believes in God, I'm honour, completely fantastic, nothing wrong. So that philosophy says that God is the creator of the universe, God created reality, God created the laws of morality, God created me, and my job is to have total faith in God, and I think that's sublime. Nothing wrong. So knowledge comes from God, and is not necessarily to be known by me. As these Buddhist Catholic nuns I met in Berkeley one time, I kept asking different questions about this and that, and they kept saying, I don't know. And I said, don't you want to know the answer? They said, no. It is a mystery, but we will know it when we go to heaven with God. I'm not complaining. That's that view. So then maybe if we trade from that view, then we're going to reify knowledge. We're going to think knowledge comes from on high. So who says it's blue? And then we'll go, well, it's just not blue. We call it maroon and we'll fight with her, But no, let's prove that it's maroon. This is interesting. This really is proving emptiness, actually. The very way the Buddhist view says we establish reality, conventional reality. So, what's maroon? I don't know what the definition of maroon is. I don't know. It's a colour that whatever. How would you define maroon? It's easier to say. Maybe she thinks. Okay, we'll say she says that she sees a tissue when she sees a cup, because I can define a cup better than I can define maroon. I think the definition of maroon doesn't make very much sense, is that which is fit to be called maroon. I think it's a bit tricky now, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? So we'll make it something more simple. That sounds like catch-22, you know, like dog and mouse, or whatever they call it. Chicken and egg, yeah. Okay, look, so she says, nah, that's a tissue, Robina. So clearly we've got some misconceptions here, we've got to sort ourselves out. So who says it's not a tissue, she says. So obviously we're going to get back to basics. And this is so simple, it's embarrassing. We have to define our terms. We have to get some agreement of what is what. When it comes to numbers, it's easy. We all know you learn your numbers, you know. So I will say, well, listen, sweetheart, what I learned in school, and I'll get other people to check it up, that a cup is, you know, this is called a cup. And what a cup is, by definition, is this flat-bottomed container that holds tea. Then I'll check around, and all the cognitions of other people, valid cognitions, we will all come up with the agreement that the English word cup refers to that which holds your tea, the flat container. Do you see what I'm saying? So that is enough. No, to make sure, so that's the definition of a cup. Then, it's not enough yet. This is the point. It's not enough yet to prove it's a cup. How you prove it's that, just listen to the definition. The second part tells you its job. That which holds my tea. Well, we prove it is that by getting the tea and pouring it. And if it does hold tea, then we just checked the boxes, didn't we? It fit the definition. But to make sure, we want to check there are no other valid cognitions that contradict that. Valid cognitions. So this is how you establish that which exists. It's not complicated. It doesn't come from on high. It does not have to be revealed to us. You don't have to believe it. You prove it to be true. And this is what Buddha's saying. And this, in a way, is already telling us about emptiness. That everything in the universe, Buddha says, everything that does exist, exists like that. You name it, you define it, you check that it fits the definition, there are no valid cognitions that contradict it, and you check the box. And we all shake hands. That's how you prove that which exists. And if the mind can't do that, if you can't establish it by the mind, remember one of the terms for that which exists is an established base. If you can't establish it, then literally it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So Buddha says, everything that does exist, whether it's called the hell realms, whether it's called the God realms, whether it's called a mind, whether it's called a dog, or whether it's called a cup, or whether it's called Buddhahood, exists as a convention in that way and can be established in the same, using the same method. Conventionally. As they call it, as he calls it, a dependent arising. And this is actually the subtlest one. Everything exists in dependence upon being caused by... Okay, we'll go there in a minute. This really is the way you establish something as existing, but actually it's the subtlest meaning of dependent arising, which is the proof that therefore there is no cup. There is no cup in and of itself, from its own side, intrinsically, inherently. There's no cup that exists without depending upon a mind labeling it, defining it, calling it that, and buying into its being that. And nevertheless, it functions as this. This is actually subtle dependent arising, and this is the final proof of emptiness, that there's nothing from its own side. So because see, right now we have this dualistic view of things. There's something kind of, especially when it comes to holy and high, we reify it. We put it there as something coming from on high, that if you're clever enough, you might just get, but which is very rude to get because it's God's business. No such thing like this. And Buddha would say, what does exist in this universe exists like this. And what he also says is that a mind has the potential to remove all the pollution from it, all the misconceptions, all the lies, all the neurotic emotions, which blind us from seeing things as they exist. We have the potential to remove all of this and to become an enlightened mind, a mind that sees that which exists without mistake. And Buddha would call that omniscient. Because mind has that natural potential. Mind is not physical. Mind is beginningless. Mind is endless. Mind has the capacity to cognize. That's its nature. So removing the pollution from it, which causes it to see things wrongly, then it causes to then see things as they are. And mind, finally, when it's unencumbered by all pollution, because it's not physical, necessarily pervades wherever there is existence. That's a Buddha mind. And Buddha says every mind possesses that potential just by definition. Do you want to ask me some questions now?
Is the cup phenomenon as well?
Phenomenon, existent, all synonymous. A phenomenon is a synonym for anything that exists. A mind is a phenomenon, shit in the toilet is a phenomenon, an enlightened mind is a phenomenon, anger is a phenomenon, a cup is a phenomenon, or existent, or object, they're all synonyms. Yeah, that's what it is.
Well, I looked up the definition of phenomenon.
What was it saying?
Yesterday.
Yeah, what was it saying?
It says anything that's perceivable by the five senses.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's only that's a bit limited for the Buddha. That's referring to it as a physical thing then, isn't it? For the Buddha, then, because mind is not physical, and mental consciousness is not physical, and there's billions of phenomena that are not physical. So that's it's a much more broad definition for the Buddha. Phenomenon is that which exists. Only the sense consciousnesses for the Buddha can cognize physical phenomena. But mental consciousness can cognize all phenomena, which of course doesn't fit that definition. Not at all.
Can perception be fleeting?
What do you mean by that?
Can that pure perception you mentioned?
Oh, I see, okay. You can get glimpses of things. It's like if you sit down to the piano and you play that piece of Bach really well today. You can have that, can't you? But until you've perfected it, it's going to only be fleeting. But we tend to think, in our culture, I've got a feeling, we often even think that spiritual experiences are fleeting, and they're like these miraculous things that you just get or you don't get, and we cling to them and hope you'll get one again. But the Buddha says you can do it every time, you can practice to the point where it'll just be your natural way. And it's good to have a fleeting one. It's just a little like a carrot, it'll show us what we can accomplish. We can do it to perfection every time. That's what we're capable of. So yeah, sure, we can have fleeting moments of things. And that's great. It shows us we've heard this stuff before and have had insights, but it's not nearly enough. We can get it to the point where it's permanent, where there's no longer any confusion. So we just keep working. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm wondering how, so I inherently, I'm like that cup. I exist, and people can say, and people can prove that I exist, and there's perceptions and so on and so forth. But I'm wondering how a person would, how do I phrase this? You kept mentioning in your talk, like, this is therapy. This is, you can be
being your own therapist is what the Buddha's trying to do.
Right.
Their mind.
Right. And so I go to therapy, and when I go to therapy, it's to deal with a natural aversion I have to myself. And I'm trying to battle that with trying to like myself.
Okay.
And so how can we spin emptiness into sort of, I'm a good person. It's good that I feel this way.
No, you
can't.
Forget, of course you can, but that's a bit too advanced, don't bother going there. Just learn to understand attachment, the addiction of attachment, and this is what I would say, from the habit of having had it so strongly. We get born into this life with the instinctive energy of terrible, bottomless pit dissatisfaction, which is the result of past attachment. So so that gives rise to then always being, so we're always being dissatisfied. What's another word for it? No matter what you do, no matter what you get, no matter what you accomplish, the voice always says, I'm never enough, I'm not enough. Or another way for that is called aversion. Another way of saying that is I don't like myself, isn't it? So it's just a habit. So how you change a habit. You don't quite, there's no bottom to get to. There's no special event that happened that caused it. You just brought a habit with you. Like a person who gets jealous easily, or a person who gets depressed easily, or a person who's attached to food easily. One of the common diseases in our culture is to dislike ourselves. Right? So then how would you change a habit? What's a simple way to look at changing a habit?
Well, I mean, I would go to the other spectrum instead of putting myself down constantly.
That's
Say, I'm a decent person.
That's
But the way, I mean, the way we phrase chocolate cake is like, it's gross, or we like it, or we're somewhere in the middle.
That's attachment and aversion, or indifference. We're looking at, but all of those are mistaken views. But the point here is, we're trying to, attachment is an extreme delusion that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of something. Aversion is the other extreme delusion that over-exaggerates the ugliness of something, and we go between these all the time. But then we've got on top of that, fortunately, in the mind as well, virtuous qualities, positive qualities, valid states of mind. So a valid statement, what's your name?
Hillary.
Hillary. So does Hillary try to not lie, steal, kill, cheat on partners, try to be a better person? Well, they are virtues. So saying the fact, this is really excellent, Hillary. If Hillary compares herself with other people who are just lying or stealing or killing or being terrorists or bombers or junkies or rapists, you would accept, without not being critical and rude about people, would you accept there are people who do that? Then you see that you don't do that, then there's a very good reason to praise yourself, isn't there? As in a valid, reasonable way. That's not attachment and that's not aversion. That's a statement of fact. Now you know that's true, but because we're addicted to putting ourselves down, our mind runs like a magnet to exaggerating Hillary's badness. So you're over-exaggerating the characteristics of Hillary, grotesquely, and that's what we all do. So you have to learn to see yourself more reasonably. And it doesn't happen overnight, and we can keep doing it, but we're not going to believe it immediately. It's like learning to try playing piano immediately. You won't succeed, but you keep doing it. But we've just got to persevere humbly. And it's not just that. You've got to do a lot more. If you're a Buddhist, you do other practices to support this. But that's the simple logic of it. It's just simply not true.
Cultivating virtue. Virtue is in a realm beyond.
Virtue is in your mind every day.
Right, no, I'm not saying like it's out of my reach, but it's beyond attachment and aversion.
In the mind,
excellence.
mental consciousness. In the mental consciousness for the Buddhist psychology, there are 3 categories of states of mind in our mind. 3 contents, very simple. One category are the neuroses, the delusions, the liars, the misconceptions, the miseries. One is the virtues of reasonable love, kindness, intelligence, joy, conscientiousness, any words you like that are virtuous, right? And the third category are lots of others sort of like, that don't have the virtuous or non-virtuous characteristics but are still crucial. Like concentration itself is neither good nor bad. Mindfulness itself, which is just short-term memory, thieves need mindfulness and Buddhists need mindfulness. So they're neither good nor bad. We've got lots and lots of those that we need to function as a reasonable person. The ones we're looking at here is those that cause happiness, which are love and compassion and kindness and conscientiousness and generosity and forgiveness, and those that cause suffering, which are attachment and jealousy and all the neuroses, and they're the ones that also are liars that exaggerate. That's their key function. They exaggerate. So we go from, a person goes from feeling they're like totally the best person in the whole world. When someone's in love with us, let's say, when we're in love, we feel like we are the most divine being in the universe. And then when they leave us, we want to go kill ourselves because we're the worst slimy piece of junk on the earth. For the next second, and you haven't changed a fraction. So it's clear it's our mind making up insane stories. And it happens to be the awful suffering of this world of ours. It's like, as somebody said, it's like a mental illness that we've got. And it is a mental illness. We've got it bucket loads worth. And the irony is it's a result of a strong habit of attachment, which brings the energy of dissatisfaction. And when you're always dissatisfied, there's this just gaping, bottomless pit of feeling things aren't enough. A person it could function for one person as just a bottomless pit of neediness, and they fill it with food. They might think they don't like themselves much. Another person might hate everybody else. And some of us are preoccupied with hating ourselves. So it's changed the object, you know. But it's attachment and aversion are very linked together. And it's just a very deep habit, darling, and it takes a long, long, long time to go finally. So we have to learn to live with it and then to keep using our virtuous little voices, our roommates, to argue with it, and it sort of calms down a bit. And we believe it less as we go on. We believe it less. But when we buy into it fully, that's why we kill ourselves and have many breakdowns. So the first step is not to believe it's true, even though it keeps popping up. Another part of your virtue says, you know, this other roommate in Hillary's mind, intelligence says, come on, shut up there, you know, it's just not true. But somehow we are addicted to believing it's true. Then we desperately want other people to tell us it's not true. But even when they do, we don't believe them. So it shows how deep the addiction is. So it's just a habit that has no valid basis. This is the terrible joke about it.
Thank you.
Okay. So slowly, you know. So we've got to sort of act like an actor, role play, being a better Hillary, acting like a better Hillary, speaking better Hillary. Be truly, I'm not sure, how do you play piano? You fake it till you make it, don't you?
Yeah.
You learn the theories first. Yeah. You don't feel like you're playing it, but you just keep bopping, baby. Same here, I tell you. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Good. And slowly, it'll start becoming natural.
Okay.
What else, folks? Yeah.
So we'll say, we look at the cup, we'll say it's not a cup from its own side. But,
Right.
what I often don't, and sometimes somebody will say, well, there's not one atom of a cup from its own side, but then I think, well, there's something coming from the side of a phenomenon that allows you to label a cup versus a tissue. So,
No.
no?
Okay, it's like smoke and mirrors. There is what we have agreed, what we have all decided between us, is the name cup refers to that which holds your tea. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So it does function to hold your tea. You can't say it doesn't. But what's the reason it holds your tea?
We pour the tea in it.
Yeah, we made it that way. We
Right.
decided to make it with a flat bottom with no leaks in it and a space in the middle. We decided, all our concepts built that up.
Right.
And we ended up with the result of our mind. It didn't grow on a tree like this, you know.
Right.
And then we pour the tea and it holds the tea. So we did create it. We did make it this way. And it does do that. And there are atoms there. And there is that shape there that allows it to hold tea. All this is true. But every one of those things we just stated are also merely labelled by the mind. Okay, so this gets us to the point about what inherent means. So what Buddha's saying is, if what he means by inherent, in and of itself, something there of itself, would have to be, and this is where it gets tricky, the analysis now, it would have to be, there'd have to be a cup there that exists without depending on anything. So the first level of dependent arising, the simplest level, is that there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon countless, actually, causes and conditions. Causes and conditions. And you're going to go back to beginningless time to come with all the causes and all the conditions that have to come together to produce this cup. And you will not find any cup among any one of those causes and conditions, because the causes and conditions, the cup is the culmination of the coming together of the causes and conditions. So the very first level of selflessness that is described in the Buddhist teachings is in argument with the Hindu position that there is a self, an atma, a self, cup self, doesn't matter. There is a self that does exist, that doesn't depend upon causes and conditions, that is permanent, meaning not changing from moment to moment, and is not dependent on causes and conditions. And that's the meaning of God. That's the very meaning of God or Creator. So the Christian teaching, the Muslim teaching, you could say this Hindu position, is actually a philosophical presentation of the position of there being something that is not caused. That's exactly the meaning of God, inherent, not caused, permanent, unchanging, always existing, but no causes. You agree? That's how they teach, if you've heard about Christianity. Well, the Buddha says there's no such thing could exist. He's not just being rude. And that's the same view of a self or a soul. There can't be such a thing. It's an impossibility. There can't be such a thing that does exist without depending on causes and conditions. There can't be such a thing, he says, in the ordinary conventional world that we know. So then the second level of dependent arising is that there is a self, the argument, the wrong view, which he argues with. The wrong position is, he says, that there is a self that does exist, separate, independent of the parts. That's what we think. That's how we talk every day. That's how we feel. Utterly, instinctively, primordially. We really do feel there is one, we know, okay, so what are the parts? So let's establish first what a self is. We have to discuss what a self is. So then a self, or Bob, right, Bob? Bob is the name we give to that self over there. So the type of phenomenon you are is called a self, or a person, or a sentient being. They're all synonymous, roughly. I, self, person, they're all referring to the same kind of phenomenon, a living being, okay? And you're a particular one called a human being, and a male American human being. So you're, and so you are, do fit the definition of being that person, don't you? The American person called Bob, you know, who lives in wherever, let's say, the son of so and so. So then that is the like cup is that, you know, you fulfill the function, you are that. So if we start to analyse here, what Buddha's saying is we think. So conventionally you are Bob. Ordinary language, it's fine to say this. But when we start to analyse the nature of Bob, we're going to look into, see how Bob is made of parts. So right there, Buddha's saying there can't be such a thing that does exist that doesn't depend on parts. Or there can't be a thing that exists separate from its parts. So we start to analyse, well, okay, let's analyse what are the parts of Bob. Well, Buddha would put it very simply. There are two parts, and they're called body and mind. Mind, remember, for the Buddha, is not physical. So you've got two main components, and he breaks it up into the 5 aggregates, which is another way, never mind that in detail here, but you've got body and mind. So then we look at the body, we know that's made up of millions of parts, isn't it? Atoms and bones and joints and eyeballs, there's millions of bits and pieces there, all bits and pieces, right? And if we're really precise, we can locate all those bits and pieces. We can break it all down into component parts, couldn't we? And then we've got a mind. That's made up of pieces as well. Anger, love, this moment, yesterday's moment. There's subtle consciousness, gross, there's billions of different parts of your mind as well. Thoughts. You agree with this?
Yep.
Okay, good. So we have body and we have mind. And we've defined all those things, right? So now we have Bob. So again, what's the definition of Bob? Bob would be this combination of body and mind called an American person who lives in something. So straight away we say, well, you know, but then where is Bob among all those parts? We're determined there has to be a Bob in there because we talk like that. Bob is this and Bob has that, and you know, and then Bob feels I'm a creep or I'm angry or I'm jealous or I have a knee, you know. We think there's a Bob there walking hand in hand with the knee or hand in hand with the anger. And Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. We'll do more analysis. And this gets us now to the third dependent arising, the subtlest level, which is the real meaning that Buddha has, which we've sort of been implying in the discussion about how we even establish something by naming it, is that Bob is merely the name we give to those parts. And those parts are the valid base. Cup is, these parts is the valid base, isn't it, of the label cup. Not this. That's the valid, those parts are the valid base for the label lid. Over here, the bits and pieces of body, the bits and pieces of mind are the base for the label Bob. Now we think Bob is in there, or we think Bob is the whole thing. Can't be. Bob is merely the name that we impose, we impute upon those parts. This is subtle dependent arising, that there's no Bob to be found in those parts. But we'll say there's no cup to be found. The cup is the name we use to refer to these parts, right? So the Buddha would say, there is no cup among those parts, because it's just the name. But the parts have to exist. There's got to be a valid base there. And then we kind of go, oh, thank God, there's a parts there. There's a handle. Oh, there's a cup. What a relief. There's a handle. There's clay. No. Because handle is merely a name we use to refer to those parts. This bit of clay here, the little lump and the bit with the space, right? So everything we refer to is like that. There's a basis, the parts, which do exist conventionally. Then there's a name we put on those parts. The name isn't those parts. It can't be those parts. Okay, they study this for 30 years and then go meditate for 30 years for the penny to drop, okay? So this is how they talk. So there's no Bob inherently here. There's not. But Bob is a name we give to those parts there. That's how they talk. Yeah.
So just a quick question. When you talk about mind, you sometimes talk about mind as if it were a stream that could be purified, where
That's
negative
right.
influences could
That
be
is the way they talk
removed,
about it. Yeah, mental continuum.
But sometimes it seems that you also talk about it as if mind were nothing more than a combination of characteristics that we would call things like anger, happiness, intelligence.
They're just examples of states of mind. So, okay, different way the words are used. Let's get clear. Generally, there's a term called mental continuum. So, I forget your name.
Abhishek. Yeah.
Abhishek.
Yeah.
Okay, so the consciousness, which is one part of this person we label Abhishek, is this non-physical part of Abhishek, and we could call it as a mental continuum that goes back and back in an unbroken chain of mental moments to the beginning of this time, and will continue on after this package falls apart. That's one way of talking about the mind stream or mental continuum. That's one way of talking. The other way of talking is each moment of mind, or as we'd call it, mental states. They actually refer to them as minds, the way they refer to mind in general, and then there's moments of mind or mental states. So anger, mind in general is this mental continuum. Mind in general is the non-physical part of you whose function is to cognize that which exists. Then we can divide it into two kinds of mind. Sensory consciousness, because it's virtually synonymous, consciousness, used broadly, and mental consciousness. So your sensory consciousness is that part of your mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the skin, the nerves, the nose, the tongue, the ears, right? It's not the physical. It's not physical, but it's a very limited level of cognition. So eye consciousness merely cognizes shape and colour, ear cognition cognizes sound and so on. But the mental consciousness is, as Lamazow puts, is where the workshop is. So that's where all these, the positive, negative and neutral states are all flying around, all these millions of roommates in our head. They're the mental states. And the deluded ones are the ones we're trying to get rid of because they cause the suffering. The virtuous ones are the ones we're trying to grow limitlessly because they're the ones that are the core of our being, and they're the characteristics of an enlightened mind when it's rid of all the rubbish. That's the way of talking. Does that make sense? Yeah? We've got a question still from that. Some conflict. No?
No.
Okay. Well, if it does come, you come up here.
Yeah.
Someone else? Tara, any questions?
No, I'm good.
You sure?
I'm happy,
Oh, so you understand it all, you mean?
it's wonderful and it's coherent, and I'm happy.
I mean, no questions.
No,
You understand it all?
I believe I do.
Okay, well, repeat back to me some of the things you've heard. Give us a little talk. Summarise it. Tell us what you're hearing. Tell us what you're hearing.
Well, okay, the cup does not exist inherently from its own side. It's dependent on causes and conditions. It's dependent on its parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's merely labeled by the mind.
Okay.
What else would you like me to?
Anything you want to tell me? You tell us whatever you'd like to tell us about what you've heard, if you understand it all.
Well, I don't really like public speaking.
That's too bad. That's because you grasped with your eyes, so there you go. So
Yeah.
it's a good test.
Okay, so that.
Tell us something else you've heard about tonight, about other parts of your mind.
I heard a lot tonight.
Okay, good. So no questions.
No question.
You've memorised it all. perfect memory and repeat it and go and meditate on every moment of it tonight?
No, I can't do that.
Okay.
But I have no questions.
Because you forgot most of it, that's why. Because you liked it when you heard it. I'm just being tricky on purpose. Either,
I get
see, look, if this
anxious
were
when I-
cooked,
when I have to
I don't
speak,
care,
yeah.
that's your problem.
No, I know
Don't
that.
tell us about it, keep your problems private, it's not your business.
Okay.
The trouble is, in the Tibetan tradition, they have trained their minds since they're little boys and girls, so they can go away from their class with perfect memory and go and sit down and meditate on every word, because that's what you have to do. That's what homework is, isn't it? If this were a cooking class, if you didn't remember all the things, all this is just advice and recipes. If you don't remember all the recipes, then what good is that?
Right.
So if you haven't memorized it all, which is the ideal, so you go home tonight and internalize it in meditation, get some realizations, then at least you'd have it in your notebook. Then you can go home, you can memorize it all, then you've got all the recipes of today, then you come back to class tomorrow, you can go to the next step. Then that's how realizations come.
Yeah. I have some notes.
Oh,
I don't review
yeah,
them.
I didn't see.
What's that?
I can't
Not
see.
that I took tonight.
That's what I'm talking about tonight, though. Today's class, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not yesterday's class. Are we communicating?
Yes, we are.
Everybody. I mean, if you want to do this, you don't have to, but that's how you internalize it all. But so what I'm purposely debating with you.
Sure.
So what I'm here, not sure, I can do what I like, I don't need your permission. It's all right, I have this discussion with Tara. What I'm hearing you say is, you like it. It does make sense to you,
Yes,
because you've heard it
yes,
before,
yeah.
and it does make sense, and you
Yeah.
like it.
I love it.
That's right, so that's what you're mainly saying.
Yes.
But to remember it, forget it. 99% you can't play it back, then that's a problem. And that's how most people think of themselves as Buddhists, because they like it. And liking it's fine, but liking it doesn't mean you understand it.
It's a beginning. I think.
Tara,
I'm beginning to
excuse me.
understand it.
Tara, did you hear what I
Yeah.
said? She's trying to defend herself now.
I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you didn't learn a word from what I just said?
I did learn.
You did. What did you learn?
Tonight
What did you just learn now,
About
from what I
the-
just said now?
that I can like it, but
Uh-huh.
it doesn't mean that I understand it.
What do you think about that?
What do I think about
That statement?
that statement?
Yeah,
It's true.
it's true, isn't
It's
it?
absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the solution to that?
Is to understand it.
And how would you do that?
To bring it to you before to review the teaching on YouTube.
What's on YouTube, is it?
It could be,
It will
It's,
be.
it's
It
on the
will be.
website.
Oh, will it?
It'll be.
Okay.
It's also on the website, there's
Oh, is it?
MP3's
Okay,
audio.
very good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're communicating with me?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Because this is a cooking class and you had to do a test.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know how to make the cakes.
I think if you asked me questions, I could answer questions. But to summarize a whole teaching.
You're such a cheat. I can't believe you're mind-bogglingly arrogant. I can't believe you. I'm stunned. I'm speechless.
I do believe I can answer questions. It's true. There's no humility here.
None. That's not. No, you missed the point. You missed the point about why you're not being humble. You missed the point completely. Never mind. Who else would like to speak to me? Something else? Anybody? Sharon, do you have any questions?
yes.
What's
I
that
do.
number?
I'm kind of confused.
Which bit? Tell me.
Well, it's because how I've been taught with the other group I was
Never
at.
mind. You just keep don't worry about that part.
Listen to
Just say the
what-
question.
Okay, you have the cup and it's a label. And like my name's a label in my body parts and my cup has all the parts and it's a label. Just because it's a label doesn't mean it can be that thing. So can you kind of, so.
Sorry,
it's
what,
like-
darling? I beg your pardon. I didn't get that.
Alright, it's a cup, okay?
So, just a moment. Cup is the name we give to these parts, so then good. So just because, what were you saying? Just because
Just
what?
because we give it the cup, that name,
Just because we label it the cup, yeah, then?
yeah, we can give it other labels also because it can be used as other things. It doesn't have to be staying as a cup. So is that kind of like it's...
You can, that means
Like
you have to change that, that's fine. For example, one of my friends in prison, if we define prison, we know as soon as we say, oh, I'm going to prison, people won't go, oh, aren't you lucky? Because we all have an agreed definition that prison is not a cool place to go, right? You agree?
Right.
You agree with that? So that's a conventional truth, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't look up the real estate and get really cheap free accommodation and go in prison. Oh, no, I'll go live there. You don't do that because it's not a cool place to go. You agree? That's our agreement about what prison means.
Right.
But if you're in prison, many of my friends can change their decision about what it is. They can do that. They decide it's a good place. Because why? Why would they do that? Why would they
Because
decide it's a good
their mind
place?
is free in there. They've done some work on their mind.
No, but
and
why would they decide to change the label of prison?
so they wouldn't feel like they're so.
Precisely, suffering. So you're absolutely correct. But if you start saying to somebody that, a knife is a plate and you're going to eat your dinner off it because you eat very small meals, and you could easily put your food on a knife and start eating it, couldn't you? But it would just be confusing in the world. No one would agree with you. So to make an agreement among everybody, you've got to get everybody to agree it's now called a plate. That'd just be a drag. But you personally can decide, my knife is now going to be my plate because I've got to cut down my eating, so I'm going to have small meals. No one says you can't. Of course you can. And why you can do that is because it's not an inherent knife. That's the point.
That's basically.
That's the point. But just agreeing, just deciding in this room, I'm going to say that 1 and 1 is 7. You'll be in trouble if you do that. So why is it different to do that? Why would that be different?
Because that's a logical mathematical.
No,
problem
that
that's
is
already
not
been
the
figured
reason.
out.
That is not the reason, because everything is the same. We've come up with numbers in the same way we've come up with a cup or a knife. That's not the logical
Because
reason.
it always equal 1 and 1 always
No,
equals 2.
it's not. No, you've totally got it wrong. That's causing 1 and 1 to be inherent. 1 and 1 as 2 is exactly the same as knife or prison. It is labelled by our mind to be that. It is not inherently that. It is not inherently that. It is merely labelled that. So then that's a good point for you to think about, because you're seeing it as inherent,
Yeah,
aren't you?
yeah.
That's right. That's right. You could personally decide your own little mathematic system that you tell nobody else about. You could decide that the sound 7, you could decide that. You come up with a whole new mathematic system if you wanted to. You could do that, couldn't you? You could do that, couldn't you? And it could be very coherent for you, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But no one else in the world would agree with you, would they?
Right,
So it wouldn't get you far, would it?
right.
Okay.
Wouldn't get me far at all.
So the point is, 1 plus 1 is 2 is exactly a dependent arising made by the mind, but that nevertheless functions in the same way that a cup is made by the mind, but nevertheless functions. And prison is made by the mind, and indeed functions to cause people suffering and to be locked up and have miserable food and blah, 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 the characteristics of a prison. But you can change the name. You can check, because there's no, and that's why in the practices in the Mahayana that talk about seeing problems as good. This is why we can call a problem good, because it has no inherent nature. Everything exists like that, including 1 plus 1 is 2. What else, folks? It's only 20 past 8. It'll be time to go home in the snow. Has it stopped snowing or is it still snowing?
It's gonna snow till tomorrow at 10.
Oh, is it really?
Tomorrow morning at 10.
Could you describe kindly, trying to translate in French the conversation, the teaching tonight in the regards to the genuine application of the nature of what you call the absence of inherent. So I'm paying attention to the word inherence in regards to inheritance.
No.
No, thank
Nothing.
you.
No,
Okay.
nothing. Inherent means, okay, the real meaning that Buddha's saying, of the use of the word inherent or intrinsic or from its own side, is that we, at the moment, this ignorance, this ego grasping, this root delusion that underpins the attachment, anger, pride and all the others, in other words, this instinctive grasping at this self, the mistaken one, the instinctive belief, which we don't think intellectually, is that there is an I in there somewhere that's independent of our parts, and that certainly is independent of the mind calling it that. In other words, ignorance, they call it ego grasping. This is the root delusion, which gives rise to attachment to get what that I wants, aversion when it doesn't get what it wants. So this ego grasping, this primordial lie, believes there is, the simplest way to put it, one we think in the most ordinary way day to day, that there is an I in there, as well as anger, as well as love, as well as jealousy, as well as knees and bones and ears and beauty and ugliness. Like Hilary's point, Hilary. That why she has self-hate or why she has attachment is because she believes there's a little Hilary in there who is hateable. We don't analyze it like this, but we really do believe, if we do analyze it, that there is a little Robina in there. There's a little I in there who kind of like the landlord or who runs the show. We really believe that. The way we talk, we say, I have a nose, don't we? So that's two phenomena, isn't it? One is called I, and then one is called the nose, which the I possesses. But if we do even a fairly superficial analysis, it's impossible to find the owner and the owned. You can't.
You can't. It's too superficial.
What?
It's superficial.
What do you mean superficial? Why do you say superficial? What do you mean superficial?
Superficial in the way that you open describe the space of the eyes that grasp all those. So that's the one that I'm trying to see in French. I'm trying to translate in my heart.
Oh, the word inherent, you mean?
Well,
if you understand
no, not
that...
just inherent, just the deeper conversation at the beginning here tonight about the emptiness.
Yeah.
That I, this I that seems to be at the core.
Yeah, right.
It really is non-existent. It is, but it isn't. It is it from
Yeah,
the
that's
point
right.
of view of the naming and the labeling.
That's right.
It really isn't.
So what are the French words that you're missing?
But I'm inherent.
Inherent, you mean?
Oui.
The word inherent. To inhere into something.
Yeah,
Inhere, to be in it, in and of it, inseparable from it.
Yeah, but before inherent, you use the word the absence of inherent.
Okay.
So pay attention.
Okay, darling,
of the
okay,
way
so
you-
listen.
you
Okay.
It's not a concept for
Okay.
me. It's an application.
No,
And-
okay, so listen.
Okay.
So go back to Tara, seeing blue where there isn't. That's a possibility, isn't it? For someone to have a mistake in their mind, and when they look at something, they don't see it correctly. They see a mistake. You understand that's possible, isn't it? Well, that's the good analogy. Buddha says there is an I, conventional I, but the delusions in the mind impose upon that characteristics that don't belong there. The deepest characteristic that ignorance imposes is an independent, real, inherent, intrinsic, from its own side, in and of itself, definite, permanent, findable, eternalistic I. Okay, we don't put those words onto it, but that's what Buddha says instinctively. Why we suffer is because we believe in that I, even though we don't have the words for it. So basically there is an I, conventional I, like there is a maroon Zen, but she sees wrongly. So now let's get to the meaning, the use of the word emptiness or absence. It's obvious. If we want to, we just don't bully Tara into saying the right thing. It isn't blue, Tara. You've got to believe that it's maroon. So she tries to memorize it's maroon, even though it appears blue to her. It's very confusing. It's not a question of bullying her into believing it. We've got to find out where the problem is, don't we? What the reason is for why she's not seeing the truth. You agree with that, don't you? So we'd fix her eyes, we'd fix her use of the English language, we'd correct the lighting, we'd fix her glasses, we would locate the problem and we would solve it. Wouldn't you agree? So then when she looks again, this is the point now, what would she see first time, once we fix the problem? What would she now see? It's not tricky. What would she see? Now that we fixed her problem, what would she now see?
What she sees.
What would she see?
She sees that nature of that card.
What, say it simply, what would she see?
The maroon.
No, okay, this is the point. She would see, she'd get a shock. She'd go,
Oh my.
oh my God, it's not blue.
Yeah.
So that's the absence of blue. So it's a vivid, turning the, oh, it's not blue, into a noun. Turn it into an object that can be cognized by the mind. Turn it into a phenomenon. The absence of blue. Can you get the point? Remember the example I've used in the past, the absence of keys? No? You're running late. You've got your key drawer. You always keep your keys there. You know your keys are there. You're running late, you open the drawer and you go, oh my God! No keys. Isn't it? It's as vivid as if you can see a thing called the absence of keys. And who would see the absence of keys? The person who believes keys are there. She believes blue is here. She will get a shock when she sees the absence of blue. So she won't just say, oh, it's maroon. Her first realization will to see the emptiness of blue. So it's not just some abstract thing in the sky. Emptiness is another word for absence. So the absence of something that we, Buddha says, have believed is existing since beginningless time. An I that's independent, real, intrinsic, there. That's why we get panic, that's why we get fear, that's why we get attachment, that's why we have anger, that's why we freak out, that's why we kill each other, that's why we even get born, Buddha says. It's the motor that runs us, this primordial ego grasping. Such that, so when we finally, using analysis and practice and meditating for years and years and life after life, eventually, the penny will drop. And when we do, on the basis of analysing the conventional I, all the much work will finally bring us to see for the first time the absence of the fantasy I, and that's the first realisation of emptiness. And from there we can't fall back into samsara. We can only keep going until we have all the realisations. So it's a stupendous, massive insight to finally realise experientially that the I we've always believed in has never existed. Now you understand.
That's I understand. Yeah. And,
that's the point.
And then it's a lack of death. It's death but without death.
Death without death.
Right.
What do you mean? What do you mean, Don? Don't get it complicated. What do you mean?
No, it's not complicated.
What do you mean?
To me, it's very simple. Very simple.
What do you mean by that? Okay, the Buddhist would be that once you've realised emptiness, you've cut the motor that keeps you being reborn. You've got more purification to do to become a genuinely realised being. But you no longer need to be reborn. Okay, still, there's more to go. As you keep removing more delusions and more pollution from your mind, eventually you don't need to be reborn. Therefore, you are like deathless. Then you don't need to be reborn. Therefore, you don't even need to be reborn. But out of compassion on the bodhisattva path, you will choose to be reborn. But you're no longer on the cycle of rebirth. They talk about it like that.
Which is different. The cycle of rebirth would be a different momentum than a repetition.
I don't know about that repetition.
Okay.
What repetition? I don't know about
Just keeping coming in and coming into.
Well, you keep going through all this. Buddha would say we keep being reborn in all the different realms of existence: animals, spirits, hell beings, humans, depending on what karma ripens. And eventually, when we've realised emptiness, we've cut the root. We've got more work to do to purify completely. And then eventually we enter the bodhisattva path, and then we become a great bodhisattva, and then we can, if at least, choose to be reborn wherever we'd like for as long as it takes to help others. But we've cut the motor of delusion. We've cut samsara, as they call it.
Yet at the same time of this extraction, you said there was two truths.
They talk about, okay, that's another discussion. There's just one packaging of the teachings that help us understand reality. One is the packaging of conventional truth, which is all the things. Then the ultimate truth is that everything, so there is a cup. The conventional truth is that there is a cup that does exist independent upon causes, conditions, parts, name, etc., the different levels of dependent arising. And then we use that and think about that as the logic that will prove to us that ultimately, finally, there is no cup from its own side. There is no inherent cup. There is, and so the cognition we need is the cognition of the absence of inherent cup, the cognition of the absence of blue, having fixed the problem. Well, here the thinking that you do that triggers the insight into emptiness is the thinking about dependent arising, causes, conditions, parts, and all this stuff that we've been discussing. So thinking about that in an analytical, careful way in meditation triggers the insight. Oh my God, that means there is no I from its own side. And Lama Rinpoche says we've got genuine realization of emptiness when two responses. One is just abject fear, complete panic, if you really get it. Or, even better, bliss, joy, that you finally see the truth, you know, that's how they say. So first they're intellectual, which means you have to be able to say it without being asked questions. That's a cheap way to learn something. Let's just tick the boxes, you know. Anyone can do that. If you can't come up with it yourself, you haven't internalized it.
Yes.
Are we communicating?
Absolutely.
Good. As long as we know that, then we will do the things to rectify it, which is take notes and memorize. That's the two options. And learn it later, whatever it is. So we have to do. So any other questions? Well, I think we should go home soon. So it's 8:35. It's a snowy night. Yes, darling. Talk to me.
You were talking earlier about the different, mental states versus mental continuum.
Yeah,
Well, I'm just wondering about, maybe this is outside the scope of what
Don't
we're
worry,
meant to
it's
talk
okay.
today,
Go on.
about the moment of death,
Yeah.
right? And what gets,
continues.
what continues,
What's your
and
name?
what doesn't.
What's your
Stacy?
Cece.
Stacy.
Stacy, okay, Stacy. Okay, so we can say there's one model of the mind, in many ways they talk about it in the tantric model, in the more esoteric teachings in Buddhism, which is the same model the Tibetan medical system uses to understand, you know, the physical energies and things. So they say Stacy's got gross consciousness coming along, inextricably linked with a gross level of body, which is this bag of bones here, okay? And gross consciousness is your senses mostly. Senses, and then a subtle level of your gross consciousness is all your thoughts and anger and love and jealousy and this business, okay? So then you've got subtle consciousness, which only really, through the death process, occurs after you stop breathing, when basically the body is finished, the senses are finished, you look like a dead person ready for the body bag, but you're not dead yet. Your gross consciousness and effectively your gross body has ceased, and it's all this gradual process of dissolution, they call it, you know. So your subtle body consists of, they talk about this in the tantric model, and they talk about this in the Tibetan medical system, is made up of 72,000 subtle, it's like a subtle nervous system, made up of 72,000 subtle channels through which wind energies or prana all course, and along with these, inextricably linked to those wind energies is the various levels of our mind, which is a curious way to think of it. We're so used to thinking of mind being a function of brain, you understand, but cognition, consciousness. So it's through, right now wide awake, it's coursing through all our body, you know, through the subtle nervous system. So the gross ceases, and now the subtle consciousness is there, and we only time we ever touch that when we dream. This very weird kind of strange experience when we dream, isn't it? You know, there's no real sense of space and time. You fly here and fall there, and weird things happen, and you know, blah blah blah. So that's subtle consciousness, and the great meditators can learn to go through this process. And when they get to the subtle level, they're able to be totally conscious there and focused, so they can stay with this death process. And then it keeps getting more subtle, till you get to very subtle consciousness, which is inextricably linked with the very subtle of the physical energy. And the Buddhist model, just like in our medieval views of Galileo and that lot, they talk about the four elements. So all of our body is made of the four elements, the gross ones and the subtle, the subtle nervous system, the wind energies, the mind. Then you've got very subtle body, which is virtually the four elements subsumed down to the subtlest, which is the wind element, conjoined inextricably with very subtle consciousness. It's like the subtlest level of your conscious being, and we're never conscious of this. It even happens every time we sleep, but we miss it every time. The great meditators, using these tantric techniques, learn to do that in their daily meditation, so that when they go through the death process, they stay totally conscious at each level and get to the very subtle level. So, simply speaking, Stacy, By the time you even stop breathing, Stacy's over, Stacy's finished, his package is dying, falling apart, just disintegrating. And by the time you get to very subtle consciousness, there's no Stacy, there's no male, there's no female, there's no anything. But the simplest way to put it is that there's this very subtle consciousness. And another way to talk about it is that it's all coming from the same continuity of what Stacy was, going back from countless lives. And every this is now karma, every microsecond, everything Stacy ever says or does or thinks, and then since beginningless time this has been going on, is imprinted in that mind, sort of programmed in that mind is the only way to put it. This is the idea of karma. And even before you stop breathing, the way you died, we can deduce, Buddha says, that the way you must have died not more than a few weeks before you were conceived in your present mummy's human womb, that you must have been a practitioner, you must have probably practiced morality in the context of keeping vows, that you died with a happy mind, that virtuous karma was triggered, all very complex, the whole system, that even before you stop breathing, it's already determined. The person, you're going to be born to, Stacey's mummy in Boston or wherever or whatever, a few weeks later, right? And that when you leave the body, this very subtle consciousness, already programmed from the past, you are in this kind of intermediate state, which is very similar to a dream state, psychologically and physiologically the same. And then eventually Mummy and Daddy hopped into bed, and then you ran like a magnet and jumped in, and off you went, Stacey, So that's how they talk, something like that. So you can talk about, it's all pretty conceptual, because if mind is not physical, can't be touched or seen or smelt or tasted, the best we can do is use these analogies of seeds and fruits and programming and blah, because what else can you use? You've got to use some words. But that's what's fascinating about the mind, because it seems so ephemeral, and yet it runs the universe, for the Buddha. It's this cognition, and then everything appears to the way whatever's in our mind, all this kind of thing. So what Buddha says also about the mind, which is not like we think in our culture, that all the neuroses in it, this is his own observation, what they say is they're adventitious, which means they're not at the core of our being. They're superficial, they're additives, although they've been there since beginningless time. And then because they're misconceptions, through this process of deconstructing our mind, realizing emptiness, what that does is eventually rid the mind utterly of all the misconceptions. And then all that's left is goodness and bliss and clarity and wisdom, because that's at the core of our being. And that's what an enlightened mind is, a mind that's fully developed in all the goodness. Because that's the character of mind. That's indestructible. You can never remove that stuff from the mind, Buddha says. And there's all sorts of logical reasons for it in all the Buddhist psychology.
But you give a hint too that the other reaction is
What's that?
fear.
Good. Tell me about that. Already she's getting insight directly. She's going to be fear there. Why don't you tell me about that?
So, what
Fear, oh my God. Fear about what? Which
what
aspect?
of emptiness.
What, darling?
Wow.
But
So
when
what
you,
would-
okay, put
what
it this
would
way,
lead you
Stacey, when
to-
you realised emptiness
Yeah.
of the inherent I, the fantasy I, the nonsense I that's never existed, which is the cause of all suffering, your consciousness, when eventually you're fully realised, your mind will pervade the universe. You will only be in bliss. You will see everything as it is. You'll have infinite compassion and infinite capacity to benefit all sentient beings for whom you have this incredible compassion. So no reason for fear. The more you realise emptiness, the bigger you become, if you like, put it this way. Even simply speaking, as Lama says, when you realise emptiness, even as we go towards more understanding emptiness, there is no fear. Fear is a product of believing in the fantasy I. Look at attachment, look at jealousy, look at depression, look at anxiety. It's in the nature of fear, and these are all the product of the root delusion of believing in the inherent I. So it's ridding your mind of fear. It's becoming fearless and brilliant and joyful. Even when you learn single point of concentration meditation, which is a technique coming from the Hindus prior to Buddha. Buddha took the technique, he runs with it. Even getting through these concentration techniques where you can access these subtler levels of your mind, not as subtle as they talk about in Tantra, but way beyond even conceptual. If you were to see a person who's cultivated these states of mind, which have been around for thousands of years and they're available to anybody, they look as if they were dead. The gross level of you is not ceasing at all, has not ceased. You're ceased, your breathing has stopped. And even getting to, they describe it in 9 stages of development, okay? And it's there, many people do this meditation. And a friend of mine who has been meditating seriously for like 30 years, off and on in retreats, he told me about one of his retreats 15 years ago. He said, and they normally don't talk about experiences, but it was for an interview for a story. It's really inspiring to have, especially Westerners do it, He said he got to maybe just touch on the 5th of the 9 stages, of single point of concentration. It takes immense work. And he said, Robina, there's no question that the joy his mind naturally experienced was infinitely superior to any joy he'd ever experienced through his senses. So right now, because we've got attachment in this body, which is a product of attachment, we're junkies for good feelings. We don't know how to, do we? We don't know how to access good feelings unless we get an object of the senses. The only way we know. So we're like junkies who need a fix all the time. Whereas our mind, Buddha says, even when it's slightly unencumbered by delusions, it's blissful. Its nature is to be blissful, but we just live in fear most of the time, and panic and self-hate and bullshit, you know. Occasionally we might have joyful feelings, but it's usually when someone else looks at me and says I'm gorgeous. You understand? We don't know how to get it ourselves. You understand? Leave it to us, we're just going to have self-hate. We're kind of hilarious, you know. So mind, the Buddha says, is pure in its nature. He means it's capable of being blissful and clear and beyond suffering, beyond delusion. That's what he's saying. That's what he means by nirvana, you know. That's some place. State of being, state of mind. And mind is indestructible, beginningless and endless. Anyway, food for thought. Okay? Good state. So finish. What's your question, my dear?
Well, I was gonna,
Yeah.
because that was the question I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Because I'm a lousy meditator,
Okay, join the club.
and
It's okay.
one of the causes that I've always believed is because I reach a point that feels like emptiness, and I just panic. And
Okay, that's interesting. So what do you mean? You meditate and kind of go quiet or something? What happens? What kind of meditation is it, would you say?
it's a mantra meditation, Hindu mantra meditation.
Okay, fine. Okay.
And
So what happens? Your mind, the conceptuality calms down a bit?
yeah, I really go deep.
Good.
And
So what
then-
happens?
And then all of a sudden, I feel this
Uh-huh.
nothingness. I don't know
And
how
you
else
panic
to
a bit.
describe, and I get scared.
Okay. Well then, you know, I mean, I have no idea what your mind is doing and what your experiences are, but the Buddhist approach would be the more you, it's sort of like if you don't know about what happens when you drive a car and you hop in the car and you put your foot on that thing called an accelerator, you don't know about it, and you go 150 miles an hour, of course you get scared. So how do you not get scared? Learning the theories. And so you know how to manage the machine. Same here. So then I would suggest, you know, if you've got good teachers, Hindu teachers, and you need to get a bit more knowledge. If you don't have that, then, I mean, the Buddhist one is, some people, believe me, I've seen them in retreats, who've got the Buddhist way to put it, with some karmic connection with these type of practices, who move into them very quickly and can get a lot of blissful feelings. They literally lose their minds because they don't know how to run the car. So that can easily happen if you haven't got much knowledge about it. I would suggest the more ground you have in a set of teachings, that's your call, the more you know what's going on when it goes on, so you know what you're doing. It's very reasonable, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's up to you then. All right, folks, thank you for coming. Very nice to see you all. Fantastic. Hour and a half, here we've been, as usual, hour and 3/4. As many thoughts as we've had, as many seeds we've planted, so how marvellous this is. More tools for us to take, to apply in our lives, to develop our amazing potential. Even if we have forgotten most of it, like Tara, like the rest of it. It's all right, Tara, you're doing well.
Absolutely.
So even though the seeds have gone in, how fantastic. Maybe nourish them with our virtue, with our struggle, with our effort, with our hard work, with our joy, with our optimism, with our praising. Hint, Hilary, for all of us. Self-praising, delighting, joyful that we've done this work, admiring our potential, and, you know, encouraging our potential. This is the most precious thing we need to do. So we never give up developing our marvellous potential for the sake of our own sake and the sake of suffering sentient beings. Kewadinyu dudai lama sange drugyurne droma chikyang malupa dei sala gopashu janchob sanchob rinpoche makye panam ke gyuchik ke panyam pa me payam gong ne gong du pavasho. Thank you, everybody. Very good to see you all.
Robina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Tara. What's your name? I forget your name.
Nina.
Nina, thank you, Nina. You doing well?
Very well, thank you very much. Last time we saw you were in New York.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, I remember.
Yeah.
You doing well? Oh, I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Now we moved up here.
Oh, you have? What for? Are you working here or something? Or studying here?